Star Fox 64, the stuff that legends are made of. This game is almost 30 years old and has endured as one of my all-time favorites. One of the greatest games ever made and a shining example as to what made the Nintendo 64 the clear winner of its console generation. This game is considered a classic by virtually everyone who's ever played it. And today, in preparation for the upcoming 30th anniversary, 2 years from now, I thought it would be fun to rank every single level in the game. We are going to be evaluating everything about the level, the stage design, the boss, the length, the general gameplay, the creativity, and we are going to showcase every single little thing that makes this game fantastic. So sit right back and enjoy. These are the best ever Star Fox 64 levels. Since we are starting from the worst levels in the game, there can be no denying that Sector Z is an absolute disappointment. Although it's sandwiched in between a lot of the game's highlights, Sector Z itself is an absolute travesty. It is an all-range stage where all you do is fight a couple of generic enemies while you wait for a couple of missiles to appear on screen so you can go ahead and shoot them down. There are 6 missiles in total, and it can be kind of difficult to shoot them down if you don't know what you're doing, but once you get the hang of it, like once you do this level exactly once, you will never, ever struggle with it again. It's uninspired, it's boring, it's generic, it doesn't even look that good. The only interesting thing about it is that this is the only stage in the game where the Great Fox is clearly visible, and you can actually fly inside of it and heal your ship. Not that you would ever do that, considering just the stage's low difficulty in general. The only way you'll possibly fail in this stage is if you end up missing your missile target and getting the Great Fox damaged. And it's actually kind of cool to see if you've never seen it before. You go through the entire rest of the game with a damaged ship, but if that happens, all that happens to you is that you end up going to Bullseye instead of Area 9, which can be a huge buzzkill if you were going for a Venom 2 run, but it's really not that big of a deal when you can just reset and try again. Like, to me, if you've gotten this far in the hard path of the game, this is not going to be a stage you struggle with. It does take a little bit of skill to shoot down the missiles. The game isn't exactly generous with the amount of time you have to shoot them down, but there's nothing really stopping you from doing it, and it just results in an absolute, just boring, uninspired level, especially if you came in from Zonus, in which Cat comes in to help you as well. So this level is just weirdly slanted in your favor. There are no real obstacles. There are no real enemies. The missiles are easily shot down. They all come from the same direction. It's like the developers were worried that what they had in mind would be too complex to program, and so they made it as straightforward as possible. The missiles come off the screen and towards the Great Fox, but there's really nothing to it. All you have to do is shoot them down, and you move on to much better things. I would say Titania is the easy path equivalent of Sector Z. It's out of the way. There's no way to get there unless you let Slippy be a complete total retard. It's a generic, boring stage that really only sticks out for one reason. This is your first exposure to the Landmaster, and unfortunately, of the 2 Landmaster levels, this is by far the weaker one, because the location is uninteresting, the monsters aren't fresh and exciting, and it just feels like kind of a slog compared to Macbeth's really stellar, tight level design with a lot of variety and a lot of cool things going on. In this one, you're basically just advancing forward until you meet Slippy. And it just feels as if the stage really doesn't have anything going for it other than that. It's kind of cool that the game goes out of its way to establish that, like, the team members do care about Slippy, even though they always give him shit for being useless. But when you actually play the stage, when you actually look at, like, the level layouts and, like, the usage of the Landmaster, there's really not all that much going for it. There's no alternate path. There's no skill involved. There's a handful of interesting enemies, especially the boss, which actually has a really cool design. But, like, the level is just not all that interesting. It doesn't stick out in your mind. And it's the level you always go out of your way to avoid, even if you end up going to Venom 1. This is a stage that is easily avoidable. And it just pales in comparison to everything else in this spectacular game. Oof, this one stings because I have a lot of fond memories of this one. Initially going on this stage and failing at it over and over and over again, only to eventually become good enough to beat it, is a really big childhood memory for me. This is the level that really made me realize that I was getting better at the game and really improving my skills. And for that reason, I really appreciate it. And it's really notable in a lot of other ways. Specifically, the fact that this is the introduction of Starwolf. This is the game where most players will see them for the first time, and this is your introduction to how their fights work, in which 4 pilots are against your 4 pilots, and you have to outmaneuver them and shoot them down. It gives this really cool sense of grandiosity and rivalry for these characters, and a lot of these voice lines are some of my all-time favorites. And it cannot be said just how iconic this level is for me personally, but there's no getting around it. As a experienced player, as someone who's played through this game probably several thousand times, probably not even exaggeration, as someone who's played through this game like several thousand times, this level is very, very straightforward. You're not going to struggle with it. You're not going to have a hard time beating Starwolf out of nowhere. There are better Starwolf fights in the game. Like, again, this is a really great level in the sense where it really sets the stage as to what you're going to find on other paths, when the game starts ramping up in difficulty on repeat playthroughs. But when you are at that experience level, when you've experienced everything else in this game, there is no denying that Fachina, not Fortuna, that was a mistranslation, Fachina is actually one of the weaker levels in the game. In spite of all of its iconic elements, there is no denying that this stage is too bare bones to be considered one of the best in the game. It's great, but it isn't good enough. It's the great Christmas tree in the sky, Bolse. Now, I personally really love Bolse. In fact, I actually really love all these levels in spite of me hyper-analyzing them. But Bolse is admittedly a really interesting penultimate stage. It seems to be designed to be for entry-level players, who are on their way to beating the game for the first time, and it doesn't really have a whole lot going for it. There is no boss. You basically just fight a handful of minor enemies and Starwolf if you never beat them. And you end up having to fly around the base and shoot a number of conspicuous targets. And it's a really interesting stage because although it's not all that difficult, it does ask more of you than something like Fachina, in which there are multiple different targets. It takes a little bit of skill to avoid the lasers and shoot the targets, and it's a really good build up to the final stage, I feel like. I've always really enjoyed Bolse. It really stings to make me to put it this low on the list, but again, I reiterate, this is one of the best games of all time. So even really iconic levels like this are not going to make the cut. Katina has a special place in my heart because after weeks and weeks of trying to get through all the teleportals in Meteos, I finally managed to land them and make my way to Katina, a planet that had been eluding me for quite some time. This is a stage that I find myself really enamored with as a kid because of the camaraderie between Fox and Bill, because of the setup, because of like the giant ship, because of the amazing all the targets flying around the screen, right? For a kid, this was absolutely mind-blowing to see. In a lot of ways, this is the biggest and most epic battle in Star Fox because this is the only time in which allied units go up against enemy units in any reasonable capacity. And that's probably why it's so empty and derelict, right? It's just to cram as many ships in this small enclosed space as possible, but it really is effective. And the fact that you have to avoid shooting your own guys, or you don't really have to, but you're you have to if you want to stop Bill from complaining at you. Like the fact that you can shoot down your own allied ships and you have to and you have to like take that into consideration in during the battle. It gives a really interesting element to it that really makes it feel like an actual conflict in this sense. And the level doesn't really have a boss. It has this UFO mothership thing that constantly spawns more ships. And you have to do your part to take it down. And to do so, you have to shoot the hatches while it's open and then expose its weak point and then take it out. It is not all that easy to do. As a kid, I failed several times doing it. It took me a lot of practice to get to the point where I can shoot the UFO down consistently, but once I was able to, it was this incredibly satisfactory experience. For me, this is the shining example of just how having different mission objectives really makes Star Fox 64 stick out in your mind as an all-time great experience, because this is a game that where you're allowed to fail. This is true for Fachina as well, but in Katina, the fact that you can lose the battle, lose the base, and Fox ends up wondering if Bill, his friend, even made it out alive, it's a really heavy scene to watch. Like when you see it as a kid with like no idea as to how what the result of the battle is going to have on the Cornerian army. It's a really effective piece of storytelling, and it's something I look back on really fondly, even if the level itself isn't that spectacular. But this is a good example of how Star Fox 64 can deliver really effective, memorable moments through failure. I really enjoy that about this game, is that you can fail. And that is something that really needs to be celebrated and appreciated. I was really wondering where I would put Sector X when I was playing through the game again, because the level itself isn't that interesting. You're basically just flying through a destroyed base, but I think the ending is what really cements it as like an iconic Star Fox level. This is a stage in which Fox and crew descend on expecting to take out an Venom base in space. They're expecting to go to battle, and they go there and they realize that the entire thing, for some reason, has been destroyed. And so you fly through the area, blasting whatever ships remain, trying to figure out what happened, and eventually you do come across the culprit, a rogue AI inside a giant mech that you have to destroy. The AI is really interesting because it's the boss that I feel like has the most personality in the game. It's constantly talking to you, making weird statements about what it wants to do, how it wants to find Andross, and like the reasons behind its behavior are never quite explained, but that's a big reason. That's what makes it so interesting. Playing this as a kid and experiencing this boss, and especially seeing what happens if you don't beat it quick enough. Slippy gets slapped out of the sky like a bitch. This stage does end in a really strange, unique way, in which the Star Fox team has to go out of their way to rescue Slippy after he Leroy Jenkins himself into being put out of commission on Titania. So Sector X is not the best level mechanically, but I think it really excels narratively in the sense where it does the best job telling a story. And this is something that you see a lot in this game, that it really has a lot of really subtle storytelling elements and really clever stage design, and you get to learn more and more about the characters as you play through the game and see more of the dialogue and experience more of the levels, right? But I think this is absolutely the best. Like, not just because of the boss itself, but because of just how the characters build up to it and how they act, and the eventual conclusion, in which one of their teammates is in danger, right? This really showcases the strength of Star Fox 64's unique storytelling, because if you're good enough, if you beat the boss fast enough, or alternatively take the insanely difficult warp on the hidden in the level, if you beat the boss fast enough, nothing bad happens. You can stop Slippy from taking his most notorious L entirely if you're good enough. And that's a really cool, exciting thing about this boss that I really appreciate, is that if you know it's coming, if you know how to put a stop to it, if you just know how much of an idiot Slippy can be, you can stop it from happening, and you can progress to a much better stage than Titania. So to me, this is a really iconic stage and something that really showcases Star Fox 64's unique strengths. As a kid, I felt it was hardest to get to Aquas because I didn't actually know how Sector Y worked exactly. I just had some vague idea that you had to play extremely well to get there, but every time it did happen, I was excited to explore the deep, dark depths of the ocean in a submarine. This is the only underwater stage in the game, and it really delivers with its unique enemy types, with its unique mechanics, with its really unique lighting, with its melancholic music, with its really fun, unique boss at the end. This is a stage that really sticks out in your mind as just an example of just how much gameplay variety is actually in this game. Because you can argue this level is slow-paced, but that really adds to the appeal. You can argue that the enemies aren't that aggressive, but they may not be enemies at all. They may just be like normal life forms down here. You can complain about how difficult it is to navigate some of the obstacles, falling rocks, electric jellyfish, the works. But to me, it's a big reason why this level is so appealing. Because it's so different from what we normally get, this is a very nice change of pace from the rest of the game. Even if there can be some things said about it. Yes, it is slow. Yes, there is this feeling that enemies don't really attack you all that much. Yes, the boss is kind of easy, but you're in a submarine exploring some of the most beautiful scenery in the game. It's definitely a really good example of just Nintendo's creativity and just how flexible this game actually is. And also, it also gives a giant W to Slippy, because the dialogue makes it very clear that the only reason this is possible is that he built this thing out of spare R-Wing parts, which is actually pretty great and a really good example of just why Slippy deserves to be on the Star Fox team. It blew my mind as a kid when I realized that the sun itself was actually a level. It was something that I wasn't expecting at all. And the revelation that you actually have to go here and fight a boss, survive the blazing hot temperatures, was an extremely appealing concept to me. Now, as an adult, you can kind of see the level's flaws, right? It is a little bit gimmicky. It's a little bit straightforward. There's not a lot of enemy variety, but I just love the tone and the style and the vibe of this. The fact that you're fighting the planet, you're trying to stay alive on the surface of the sun says is enough for me. You know, the fact that you're dealing more with boulders and like random creatures that live here, you're not even really fighting Andross's enemies, really. It's just like things that seem to be native to the sun. But like just the simple fact that the environment is so antithetical to what your ship can take, to the point where it's literally melting. Your R-wing cannot take starts to loses damage as you fly closer and closer to the surface of the sun. Like, to me, it's just a really good example of just how Nintendo was able to come up with such a unique situation. This idea that they were able to program this and like make it into a functional level and give you a really good, interesting boss at the end, which genuinely has a great design, intimidating appearance, and one of my favorite lines in the entire game. And this is a fantastic level and one that I always enjoy coming back to. Every single playthrough always starts in the same place. Corneria is the level that made us fall in love with Star Fox 64, with its amazing character designs, with its cool ships, impeccable controls of the R-Wing, with its cool introduction where you're flying over the ocean and into the city, and Peppy gives you tutorials, and you protect your wingmates from being attacked, and you end up fighting one of the two bosses. Corneria is absolute peak Star Fox in a lot of ways, in which it introduces a lot of critical aspects of this game in a really organic, fun, engaging, interesting way. Corneria is an extremely well-designed level that you will play over and over and over again as you play through each and every route in this game. You will get to understand just how dynamic and interesting this game always is. Like, even now, I find myself learning more things about this game. You know, I end up improving my strategies, my score count, my skills, and it just goes to show you just how well impeccable the level design for this stage actually is when it comes to its just general structure, when it comes to its difficulty level, when it comes to its hidden content. Like, you know, as a kid, you're definitely going to end up against the easier boss. And eventually, as you progress, you'll eventually figure out, probably by accident, how to trigger the second harder boss. And from there, you'll start to understand how the root system works. And Corneria just does a spectacular job just introducing these concepts to you in a natural, organic way through gameplay. Because you're not going to learn everything about Corneria by watching a tutorial. You're going to learn it by playing the game. And like I did all those years ago, failing at it. I can still remember when I was young enough where I couldn't beat the first boss. I kept flying circles around it and couldn't wrap my head around how all range mode worked. You know, up to that point, you just keep going forward and you're going to end up at your destination eventually, as long as you stay alive. So to me, this is a really good example of just what makes Star Fox 64 great. Like, everyone's played this stage, everyone knows it. This is the stage that will introduce you to Star Fox 64, and that is what makes it so special. Putting Macbeth so low really hurts my soul, considering just how important this level is to me and just how much I enjoy it and how much I love trains and everything about it. But I think Macbeth is a little bit too easy. And maybe figuring out how all this works takes a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. You know, it certainly did for me. But the long and short of it is, no matter what happens, you'll be fighting the boss at the end, and you'll get to take it out, and it's a good time. But when you figure out how the level actually works, when you figure out how to trigger the secret ending, which is going to take a lot of practice and it's going to take a lot of skill and a lot of understanding of how the game works. Once you figure that out, you are rewarded with the single greatest level clear scene I have ever seen in my life, and that alone kind of puts this game up there. But this is the better of the two Landmaster stages in this game. This is an example of what the Landmaster can do and what makes it interesting. The fact that you're chasing after a train on treads is a really interesting, appealing idea to me. The fact that your wingmates are above, fighting ships and keeping them off you while you're trying to blast away at the train and trying to weaken it and try to stop it from reaching its destination. It is an incredibly satisfying, just incredible experience that really showcases just what the Landmaster can do. You'll be dodging things, you'll be hovering over objects, you'll be trying to stop yourself from getting caught in between broken train parts. There are ships that come down after you occasionally. There's all these things happening, and it's just so exciting and fun. And when you finally get to the end, when you finally figured out how to beat this level, how to really do it, you get one of the absolute most Kino moments in all of video games. Clearing Corneria properly for the first time and making your way to Sector Y is a major achievement for any Star Fox player, and very thankfully, the level does not disappoint. You are thrust into a battlefield in which several of Venom's soldiers in giant mech suits are coming after you, shooting you, and getting involved, swerving in between giant spaceships and destroying those on your side. The level is very simple in this premise, the fact that you're going up against guys in mech suits, but it really does a lot with the concept. The fact that they're swerving in and out, in and around you. The fact that they're a lot more mobile than most enemies. The fact that you'll never be able to take out all of them. They can take a couple of hits. And the fact that the boss ends with a super mech suit is a really fitting ending to this stage. For me, personally, the most memorable thing about this stage is getting to Aquas. In order to get there, you have to get at least 100 hits on your counter. And that's not something that's immediately obvious, especially if you've been playing the game for a while and expect there's some kind of special mission objective you have to do. But no, all you have to do is get enough hits on your counter to go to Aquas. And if you manage that, you get to move on, no questions asked. So essentially, this forces you to navigate the stage, getting as many hits as possible. I believe this is the only level in the game where you have to do that in order to proceed. And to do so is a really monumental effort. You really have to step up your game to get all the targets you need in order to move on to the next stage. And I think it's a really good test for players that are just beginning to get good at the game. When you get to Sector Y, you're good. You've probably beaten the game at least a couple of times, but you're not quite at the point where you're going for high scores or really understand the point of the score counter or even appreciate the fact that it's going to get you to go to the next level. And this is the really interesting thing about Star Fox 64 that I think a lot of casual fans don't understand is that the score does matter. The score does reflect your own skill at the game. There are huge skill gaps between world record holders and normal players, and it's actually quite a lot of fun to improve your skill set. And continue to improve at the game, even long after you've done everything there is to do in it. And it's definitely something that I think needs to be more appreciated by the community at large. But for me personally, I think Sector Y really encompasses that feeling really well because of how reliant it is on the score counter in its setup and its and how to get mission accomplished, right? It's very important to pay attention to that in this stage. And this is probably going to be your entry point into caring about scores going forward. It's interesting composing this list because I kind of realized that my favorite levels aren't necessarily the best objectively. Because I've spoken a lot about how much Katina, Fachina, Aqua's mean to me, when in actuality, I do think one of the better levels in the game is Zonus, which has never been one of my favorites, in part because it's kind of annoying shooting out of the lights. There are things flinging themselves at you everywhere. There are all these times where you get knocked around. It's one of the harder stages, and a part of me is still a little bit overwhelmed by everything that goes on here. But when you really look at it objectively, when you look at like just the general structure of the level, all the things you have to do, the difficulty of getting to getting a mission accomplished, when you look at the introduction of Cat, when you look at like the amazing boss fight at the end, there is no denying that this is absolutely one of the best made levels in the game, even if it's not my personal favorite. This level has a ton going on. It's insanely long. It has this really cool theme to it. This idea that Venom has polluted this entire planet. Really showcasing just how horrible these people actually are. You're fighting like all these enemy tankers. You're showcasing a lot of your abilities in this, and it's a bit of an endurance level. It's insanely long, and considering the gimmick in which you have to shoot out these searchlights to get to Sector Z, it's going to take a lot of practice to get everything you need in order to get to the end of the level, beat the boss, and move on. And what a boss it is. I would argue this is probably the second most complex boss in the game, only behind Area 9's boss. But the amount of moving parts on this thing, the fact that you have to destroy it in a very specific order, the fact that like it can repair itself, the fact that like the boss's lines are memorable and iconic, like like it's simple, and yet it just comes together to make this really cool, unique boss that really feels like it suits the stage. One that I really, really enjoy fighting every time I play it. In fact, every time I take a hiatus, there's always this period of time of just like, wait a minute, what am I supposed to shoot first again? Whenever you take any period of time away from the game, you do kind of tend to forget the specific pattern and to beat him quickly. But the fact that you have to like think about what you're doing, and like sometimes you end up seeing patterns that you haven't seen before in a while, that's really interesting. That really showcases just how well designed the boss actually is, especially compared to the aforementioned Area 9 boss, in which you are going to be doing the same exact thing in the same exact order every single time, even though that boss also requires a bunch of phases to damage it properly. Like, it's a really cool, well-designed, interesting boss, and I really wish there were more bosses in this game like it. When I was playing through Meteo again, I was really surprised with just how much is actually going on in this level. You have a variety of different enemy types. You have all this stuff happening around you. It's a fairly lengthy level, and it's fairly difficult, with a boss that takes quite a bit of precision and practice to beat. As a kid, I wasn't able to beat it, I remember. It took a little bit of study and learning how to hurt it. But everything about this level is iconic. The fact that you're in deep space, the fact that you have to navigate all these asteroids, the fact that there's this really cool warp that you're probably not going to hit your first time. You know, all the situations your wingmates get into, the new enemy types that come out of nowhere, you know, enemies swarming out of rocks, you know, like giant space spiders, like drawing webs in front of you, like all of it just leads into some of the most iconic and memorable imagery in the game. And I think that's a really good way to describe this, right? Imagery, right? None of this is explained, none of it's relevant to the plot, but like seeing this for the first time, it really gets your imagination running as to like what the Star Fox world must be like. The fact that so many life forms are just in space like this, just attacking you for no reason, during in this asteroid field, it really demonstrates just how alive the universe really feels. Like swarming through asteroids and while fighting enemies, it just really strikes you as this really monumental, like amazing experience. And the fact that there's so much variety makes everything keep feeling fresh and exciting all the way through to the end, in which, as you begin to approach the end of the stage, you begin to see the next stage, Fachina in the background, and it is such a cool thing to see. This idea that like the planet that you're heading towards next is in the background is such a cool, iconic thing that really makes me feel as if that a lot of thought went into world building this game. The fact that it really does feel like you're progressing and advancing and like getting into more and more difficult situations. And this is a fairly difficult stage. It's a huge upgrade over Corneria in every way. And for a first time player, this is probably where you might get a game over for the first time. So looking at this game, looking at this level, like, yeah, this is absolutely one of my personal favorites. There's no getting around it. Area 9 is the best of the first 6 stages of the game. Area 9 features an incredible premise of Venom utilizing everything in its power to defend itself against your onslaught. Ship after ship is coming after you. You're breaking through their lines. Their commanding officers are panicking, and in their last desperate moment, they send out their greatest super weapon. Some weird thing with some crazy cloaking technology and these bizarre force fields. They don't explain everything about what the boss is. They don't build up any of these characters, and yet they're there anyway. And that's what makes all of this so memorable. It feels as if everything you've been doing the past several playthroughs has been building up to this moment. The fact that you're actually taking on Area 9 and seeing wave after wave of ship throw themselves at you, seeing the commanding officers just cower in fear as you advance on them. It's so exciting, it's so intense, and really showcases Star Fox at its most action-packed. This is a really stellar final stage that really demonstrates everything great about the game from a gameplay perspective. Now, in a lot of ways, this is the best the game has to offer when it comes to absolute gameplay. But when it comes to story bits, there are 2 levels that are far, far superior. Although Venom 1 and 2 are very different levels and are very, very distinct from one another with their own completely unique tones and mechanics and features, they're both absolute highlights of the game. If every playthrough begins in Corneria, they always end in Venom, whether it's the easier Venom 1 or Venom 2. And when you really take into consideration which is better, you really can't choose, because when you really think about it, the reason why Venom 2 has as much impact as it does, with the reveal of Andross's true form, with the final defeat of Starwolf, with the general build-up and vibe of what they're doing in this version of the level, like a lot of that is set up by playing Venom 1 over and over and over again. If you've been playing the game a lot, and if you've gotten to Venom 2, you definitely have. If you've been playing the game a lot and keep getting to Venom 1 and seeing those credit sequences and seeing Andross just kind of laugh at you, the machine, beating the machine, that Andross used to as a decoy, so he's still out there. Like the fact that you go out in Venom 2 and beat him for real is a really memorable, iconic moment. But if it wasn't for Venom 1, that wouldn't be set up nearly as well. And just the ending in general, the fact that James's father appears as a ghost to guide him out of the destroyed base. Like, to me, that's a really pivotal moment in video game history. It's one of like the iconic N64 moments for me personally. That's one of my favorite things to happen in any game ever. But for me personally, like there is a lot of argument to be had that Venom 1 is better than Venom 2. It has a better stage. It has a better build-up. It has a unique boss, and the Andross fight in Venom 2 isn't particularly difficult once you know what you're doing. But the way I see it, and I think a lot of people will agree with me on this, is that Venom 1 and Venom 2 complement each other. They're as good as they are because they complement each other's shortcomings. Venom 2 doesn't have a real build-up stage to the Andross encounter, but instead what it has is a really memorable final encounter with Starwolf, in which they have improved AI and better ships. The Andross fight, the first phase, is pretty similar to the first one, but when you get to the second phase and expose his true form, you have to do something radically different and really showcase just everything and just completely adapt on the fly to this situation that you've never seen before. It is a really cool, memorable experience beating this game for the first time, and I think it wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for this game's unique structure. And I do think that is the big takeaway I want to give you as I leave for the night. Star Fox 64 is a masterpiece because all of these levels are so distinct and unique from each other. There isn't really a bad level in this game because they all offer something unique and special that really resonate with people in different ways. I found myself really surprised that although I dislike Sector X and to a certain extent Titania, there are plenty of things you can say about them that are interesting and appealing, that really showcase just how much thought and care they put into this game. This is a game that I've come back to and played over and over and over again over the years, experiencing every little nook and cranny and experiencing just everything the game has to offer. And a big reason for that is because of just how much these stages change depending on your understanding of the game. Sometimes you're going to be struggling. Sometimes you're going to be breezing through it. Sometimes you're going to see Bill or Cat in a location that you typically don't see them in. Sometimes Starwolf will be on Bullseye. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes you'll take different paths on Venom 1 and have a completely different experience, right? Like, the game is, in a lot of ways, endlessly replayable. And it's a good example of just how a game like this, a game that you can beat in about 45 minutes, can stay relevant for so long and appeal to so many people, because each and every one of these stages is masterfully designed and come together to create a masterpiece of masterpieces. Though one of the best games on N64 and one of the greatest games ever made, Star Fox 64. Thank you for watching.